Economic Justice Workshop, which follows up the very first panel that you had, that you were here for this morning. And it's an opportunity for those people who are working on economic justice to have a dialogue with people working on different public services. And that's going to be the nature of the group discussions that we'll be encouraging you to have. In fact, after, what we're going to do is we're going to have four very short inputs about tax justice, debt justice, challenging austerity, and then the civil society group in the financing for development space. And we'll hear 3 minutes from 4 different people, and then we're going to come into groups. And those groups will be exploring, having a dialogue really between different public services and this economic justice agenda, trying to identify what we can do better, what we can do more effectively together going forward. And I'm just sort of rambling now so that we can get more people to come down before we formally start. Actually, what I'll do is I'm going to give you a flavour of the sorts of things that we want you to talk about in the groups, so that you can start preparing your thinking about how you might start that dialogue in the groups. We will have a French group, a Spanish group, a couple of English groups, depending on how many people there are. But we're going to be trying to explore how often are you told by ministries of finance or by governments that there's simply no money and no alternative, and that the only thing you can do is use the money you've got more efficiently rather than getting more money. To explore a little bit the root causes of the challenges in financing of different public services, and to explore how the economic justice agenda around tax reform, ambitious and progressive tax reform, action on debt justice, and action to challenge austerity can impact and transform the financing of public services. We will also be hearing from you what are some of the experiences you've got of already working from a public service, from the public services you're working on. What have been your experiences of working with that economic justice agenda, and what more we could do together? And at the end, we'll be moving towards discussions about particular opportunities and moments where we can work more effectively together in the next 3 years. So that's going to be the sort of substance of what you're going to be doing in groups. We're very keen to get a sort of dialogue going between different public services and those who have worked on those issues around tax, debt, and austerity. So to kick us off, and I think we should just get started now, and hopefully more people will come down as we do. We're going to have a 3-minute input, and I'm guaranteeing you it's going to be 3 minutes because I'm going to stop people talking after 3 minutes. We're going to hear, first of all, from Aurea, who you saw earlier today chairing the opening session. 3 minutes on tax justice, what are the key events and opportunities, and what you, hopefully some of the ideas, what might be opportunities in the next 3 years. You're going to have 3 minutes, and then we're going to pass over to the next person.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Hola. Thank you. I think this is about preaching to the converted, but there are very rare moments in the tax justice, in the economic justice movement, that we can celebrate things that happen as a result of hard work of many organizations over the years. So we are sitting here at a really critical moment that many of you have worked towards, and I want to serve a reminder of that. Jayati has mentioned it, Laura has mentioned it, but of course we all know that last week at the United Nations we got to make inroads in the process of taking discussions on global tax reform to a forum that is imperfect, but is the forum that we have to democratize tax discussions. So for many years, we've had global tax discussions being had in a forum where most of developing countries were adversely included, to say the best. As many of you know, the OECD has been having the steering role in shaping global tax rules. And while, as many of you know, it's a welcome discussion about the reform. It's been long term coming. Developing countries, global south countries really reject the platform in which that discussion has been had, and also reject the premise that through which that discussion was had. Once there was a concern about how they be included in the negotiations. Within the OECD framework, developing countries were being many times left outside of the discussions, invited to join very on top of the hour without really time to understand the issues and even contribute their views. And the proposals, the solutions that were being proposed were really counter to the demands that many were presenting, including, for example, on the issue of a global minimum tax. The African Forum ATAF, African Forum of Tax Administrations, said that for most African countries, the effective corporate tax rates is about 25% and above. A 50% tax rate, that is the solution that the OECD was proposing, would mean that countries in Africa and over the global south would effectively lose taxing rights. So because of all of these reasons, we at the Global Alliance for Tax Justice call them shaky pillars, because of these reasons, but also because we believe that tax discussions need to be democratized. We pushed together with many of you and with your movements for this discussion to be had under the UN. It's a much fairer ground of struggle, and it's a much fairer space for us to contend because the rules are clear, and at least every country has a vote and has a procedural process for how decisions are made. This feels like hot chairs. David is coming, but thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And because that's great on the global tax reform, it's also tax reform at a national level. Ambitious and progressive tax reform can transform the financing of public services. There is a very credible evidence that countries to expand their tax to GDP ratio by 5 percentage points. So low-income countries from 16% to 21% could double their spending on education and health and social protection. So we want to massively increase financing for public services. We need domestic and ambitious and progressive tax reform. Great examples from Colombia and other Latin American countries now emerging. That's just my little addition to that. The second speaker, I think we're going to Rodolfo now to talk about debt for 3 minutes. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Trataré de resumir en 3 minutos lo que tiene que ver con un problema tan sistémico como la deuda externa e interna también, la deuda pública. Bueno, sabemos que es un problema que está dentro del sistema y que no se va a solucionar si es que no hay cambios en el propio sistema financiero. Por eso es que hablamos de una nueva arquitectura financiera cuando trabajamos temas de deuda, ¿no? Y es un problema que no es que ha llegado recién con la pandemia, sino que lo venimos arrastrando hace ya varias décadas, sobre todo los países en desarrollo. Algunas características, digamos, que ya habían venido dando en la deuda es el crecimiento de la deuda interna, ¿no? La deuda pública interna ha venido creciendo junto con la deuda externa. En algunos países inclusive es mayor la deuda interna. También hay una mayor emisión de bonos soberanos de parte de los países. Es decir, estamos más endeudados con acreedores privados. Antes, la gran mayoría de la deuda era deuda bilateral, pero ahora estamos más endeudados con privados. Y esto, bueno, genera también una serie de problemas. Luego, la intervención del Fondo Monetario Internacional también es importante acá tomarlo en cuenta. Hemos visto casos como los de Argentina, por ejemplo, países que tienen acuerdos con el Fondo Monetario y aún así no solucionan sus problemas o incluso los agravan. Y también el rol de China, ¿no? Cada vez más China tiene mayor presencia en países que reciben créditos de este país. Bueno, tenemos también ahora en el contexto de subida de la tasa de interés, tenemos un problema mucho mayor porque esto encarece obviamente los pagos de deuda. También la presión del tema cambiario. ¿no? Las monedas se deprecian en nuestros países y cuando tenemos que pagar en dólares la deuda externa se nos hace más difícil. Entonces tenemos esos dos factores que hacen que la deuda sobre el presupuesto, el servicio de deuda respecto al presupuesto público sea mucho mayor en este contexto. Y por supuesto esto trae problemas de austeridad porque por la prioridad que se le da al pago de la deuda los países tienen que tomar medidas de austeridad, también tomar reglas fiscales estrictas para no endeudarse más allá de lo debido o de lo comprometido y no gastar en lo que realmente se debería de gastar, ¿no? Que es protección social, derechos de las personas, etc. Y eso viene trayendo problemas mucho más ahora que antes. Luego está también el factor climático, ¿no? También genera mayores costos a los países que están más expuestos y además con un endeudamiento más caro y se genera un círculo vicioso. Voy a terminar. Y finalmente, bueno, ¿qué es lo que podemos plantear desde sociedad civil para afrontar estos problemas? Bueno, primero que se anule la deuda por un término o por lo menos del servicio de la deuda, que se dé una suspensión de la deuda por 2 o 3 o 4 años. También exigir mayor transparencia sobre los créditos, tanto del acreedor y de parte del deudor. Las calificadoras de riesgo también no deberían existir o por lo menos ver ahí cómo reformar ese sistema. Procesos de reestructuración de la deuda de manera independiente, transparente, oportuna, vinculado en el marco de Naciones Unidas, y acá entra el proceso de financiamiento para el desarrollo, y también la conformación de un club de deudores que sería, creo, importante en los países, sobre todo del sur global. Gracias.
It is terrifying, isn't it, that how many countries are actually paying more in servicing their debt than they are for education or for health or education and health combined. It's grossly unacceptable that those debts of the global south are enforced in one way or another and end up people have to pay, and that cripples the capacity of countries to provide public services. The debt of the global north to the global south, the climate debt, unenforceable. I'm looking for the day, maybe a few years from now, when the global south collectively says, we're not going to pay our debts until you pay your debt. And that will be an interesting moment. Hopefully it will come one day. We're now going to go and look at what's the consequence of so many countries who are indebted, the imposition, often by the IMF Ministries of Finance, of austerity. And Chiara from Eurodad will say 3 minutes on that.
Okay, buenas tardes. Hi, everyone. So, austerity is our new normal. It has been a while now that the pursuit of fiscal consolidation has become the ultimate solution of pretty much every economic crisis, economic problem. This has been the case for a long time, obviously. Fiscal consolidation has been promoted aggressively for quite some decades, but truly since the global financial crisis has been normalized in the global north and in the global south alike. And this is despite the fact that there is such a growing evidence of the human impact of austerity, of the fact that it increases poverty, it increases inequalities of all kinds, it hits women the most vulnerable groups the most, and this is because fiscal consolidation is typically pursued cutting public services, cutting the public wage bill, that means salaries for health, education, public sector workers in general, and of course they are mostly women, as we know, cutting universal social protection measures and targeting these measures to just some sectors of the population. So overall, it affects all spheres of society, and it greatly undermined our ability to be together as a community and to widen, to grow the common good. Now it pushes towards privatization and individualization of our lives. Now, in all of this trend has many reasons, but it has been strongly promoted by international financial institutions, such as the IMF and the World Bank. Of course, they have done it for decades. The IMF, notably with their loan programs, the conditionalities that go with their loan programs. And for a few years, they have presented that that was no longer the case until from 2012 onwards, they have been talking about the importance of public services in their rhetoric and in the research. And many of the organizations here in the room have tried to call them off for that and show what actually they were doing in practice, which is still promoting austerity conditionalities. With the COVID-19, the IMF has started a new wave of loans, and with it, a new wave of austerity. Again, in the past few years, many of the organizations in the room have made a number of publications that demonstrate that many more countries are getting indebted with the IMF, and they are being recommended to cut public spending. At the point that recent research has found that next year, 2023, 143 countries will be implementing austerity measures, meaning about 85% of the population. And this is going to greatly undermine all of the progress that has been achieved in human development. Now, many organizations, again, many of which are here in the room, including the one that I represent, Eurodad, this year have finally launched a campaign that seeks to put together all the efforts that are being done at national and global level to fight this new wave of austerity in terms of fighting the policies, but also in trying to fight the narrative that sees austerity as the only solution, the only way that it's possible, and to demonstrate that there are alternatives. I will finish here. This one, it's that you'll see, it's a report that we did, and it talks exactly about IMF, World Bank, and public services.
Thank you. No, that's very good. So, thank you very much, Chiara. Look, we've heard bits and pieces about the tax justice movement. There's a very powerful global alliance for tax justice, national tax justice platforms in most countries, as long as, and there's debt movements organized in every region. There's now an End Austerity Alliance. What we've been doing over the last 2 days is talking to each other and trying to work together and be clear how can we strengthen the capacity of different public service struggles to work together to advance the change that we all need to see and stop being played off against each other. If you're going to have more money for education, you need to take it from some other public sector budget. We need to come together much more than we have. There is one space that people do come together, Civil Society Forum on Financing for Development, and we're going to hear 3 minutes on that from Stefano from Society for International Development.
Thank you, David. If somebody can distract David for a few seconds, Okay, I have 3 minutes, so 3 things. First of all, a little bit of history. No? Financing for development starts after the decade of developmental conferences in the 90s, that basically set the somehow global development agenda in so many areas. And it basically was established at the demand of the Global South to create, under the aegis of the United Nations, a space where to negotiate systemic reforms, and particularly governance reforms, to shift the barycenter of economic governance away from developed countries' institutions, the OECD, the Bretton Woods institutions, into truly multilateral institutions under the aegis of the United Nations. So the first conference in 2002 in Monterrey sets the so-called Monterrey Financing for Development agenda. Now, financing for development is a bit of a wrong term because it evokes the idea of looking for money, while in fact, we are really talking about a comprehensive agenda for systemic policy and governance reforms on tax, debt, private finance, international development cooperation, trade, and systemic global finance, among others. Now, what is the present? That's the past. No, the present is a huge opportunity because the next Financing for Development Conference, the fourth in a row, so FFD4, is going to happen in 2025. It has just been decided by the General Assembly. And this is very interesting because it puts in perspective what Aura was telling us before about the recent decision to initiate an intergovernmental process towards a tax convention. It gives it a clear deadline because those processes will come together in that particular context. It's a huge opportunity. Why? Because it's a space that has jurisdiction, meaning where governments can take decisions, soft and hard, in the reform of the global economy. It's democratic, at least on paper. No, let's not be naive. Global political economies are strong, but at least it's a space where every country has a vote, can participate, and where there are clear mechanisms for civic participation. It provides an opportunity for an integrated agenda where we can connect tax, debt, trade, finance, and others. And it provides an opportunity to ensure that systemic reforms has a very strong developmental framing, including on the importance and centrality of public services. So lastly, this is the reason why civil society, after Addis conference in 2015, has really elected this space as a space for convergence, where tax, debt, trade, finance, feminist alternative economies movements come together to really converge, coordinate, explore the intersection, and speak with one strong collective voice. Hopefully, some of you are already part of that process. If not, hopefully you will join it after this particular event. Thank you so much.
So I think the United Nations General Assembly has been quite an exciting place. 2 months ago, there was a Transforming Education Summit with heads of state, which laid out a call to action on financing of education that is all about tax justice, debt justice, ending austerity, challenging the use of public sector wage bill constraints that undermine the employment of teachers. We need to be using those spaces, and that was one of the examples of how we link this agenda with the agenda of financing a public service, in that case education. But fundamentally, the same narrative exists for every other public service. That if we really want to transform the financing and stop services competing with each other for a shrinking budget, we need to increase the size of the budget, and that's through action on debt, tax, and the macroeconomic policies that are followed. I think the sort of work that's been bringing together the tax movement and the education movement is a positive example, but literally every other public service can work together for that transformative agenda. We're now going to hear from all of you in small groups. So we're going to divide the room. There are a couple of 3 or 4 circles already created. We want no more than 10 people in each group. And so we actually want you to get up now and move to a group. We're going to have a French group here, and we're going to have a Spanish group here, and then we'll have some English groups at the back. If there are more than 10 people in any of the groups, create another group. We will have facilitators from the economic justice workshop, which has happened over the last 2 days, for each group. And those facilitators will take you through a process where I'm going to carry on talking whilst you sort yourselves out. They will be exploring what is your existing experience of working with this economic justice agenda? What can we do better together in future? How can we work more closely together to bring different public services together behind some collective demands? Those collective demands which will benefit all public services at the same time by increasing the budget available for everyone. We believe that this is a moment, a unique moment, where we can come together on this agenda. So now, please, everyone get up, find yourself into a group of 10 people. I think we said Spanish is going to be here at the front on the left. If there's more than 10 people in the group will split into two. This is French down here, at the front on this side. We'll have English groups at the back over there. If there's more than 10 people in a group, make another group. And we will have a structured discussion for about 1 hour, so you can get into some of the detail of your experiences of working with public services and the economic justice agenda. We want you to share honestly what have been some of the challenges and what are the opportunities to do things better in the future. At the very end of the session, we'll only hear a few top-line thoughts from each group. Just to be very clear, really this is about the dialogue in the group and having a meaningful discussion between yourselves and the different public services. I think Spanish is getting too big, might need to split, let's see. How are we doing at the back there with the English groups? We're okay. So I think I'm going to shut up now and I'm going to leave it to the capable hands of the facilitators. Just be clear, every group must have a note taker who can keep detailed notes. I think someone's already been appointed. Make sure that you know who that is and make sure they're taking good notes, because we will collect all of this to inform our future planning. Thanks very much, and we'll see you in about 1 hour after this discussion.